The first bullet struck the dust at Grace Foster's feet before she even heard the shot. She hitched up her skirts and dove behind the water trough, heart pounding as wildly as the hoofbeats approaching the station. Laramie, Wyoming Territory, 1876 was proving to be far more perilous than the teaching position in Boston she'd abandoned 3 weeks prior. "Sorry about that, madam." A young man galloped into view, reining his horse to a stop. "Wasn't aiming for you. There's a rattler just behind where you was standing." Grace peered cautiously over the trough. Sure enough, a thick-bodied snake lay dead in the dirt, its head nearly severed by the bullet. "You could have called out a warning," she said, trying to steady her voice as she stood, brushing dust from her traveling dress. The young man removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached hair and a face too youthful to match his expert marksmanship. "My apologies. I didn't want to startle it into striking you. I'm Caleb Rawlins. My pa sent me to fetch you from the station." Grace squinted up at him. "Your father is Mr. Isaac Rawlins? The one who advertised for household help?" Caleb nodded, sliding from his saddle. "That's him. He said you'd be arriving on the noon stage." He glanced at the large trunk and 2 valises beside her. "That all your belongings, Miss Foster?" "It is." Grace straightened her bonnet, trying to compose herself. The advertisement had been specific. A respectable woman needed to maintain a household and care for a 10-year-old boy while his father managed their cattle ranch. Good wages, private quarters, and the promise of safety had been enough to convince her to leave Massachusetts and travel west. Nothing had prepared her for being greeted with gunfire, however well-intentioned. Caleb loaded her trunk onto the back of a wagon that had been waiting at the station. "Pa would have come himself, but we got a situation with the herd. Spring calving season's keeping everyone busy." Grace watched him work, noting his efficient movements despite his youth. "And how old are you, Caleb?" 15, madam," he answered, securing her trunk with rope. "Old enough to handle the team and get you home safe." "I was told I'd be caring for a 10-year-old, Grace said, confused. Caleb grinned. "That's my brother, Samuel. I'm practically grown." The wagon ride took nearly 2 hours, giving Grace ample time to absorb the vast Wyoming landscape. Rolling plains stretched toward distant mountains, and the April air carried the scent of sage and fresh grass. So different from Boston's crowded streets and sea air. "What made you answer Pa's advertisement?" Caleb asked as they crested a hill. Grace hesitated. The truth that she was fleeing a scandal not of her making, but that had ruined her reputation nonetheless, wasn't something she wished to share. "I wanted adventure," she said instead, "and your father's offer seemed providential. Must be mighty brave to travel all this way alone." "Or desperate," she murmured, too quietly for him to hear. The Rawlins ranch appeared as they descended into a wide valley. A substantial log house with a stone chimney stood near a creek, surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. Several small cabins dotted the perimeter, likely housing ranch hands. In the distance, cattle grazed on the new spring grass. As they approached, a small boy burst from the house and ran toward them, waving frantically. Behind him, a tall man emerged more slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth. "That's Samuel," Caleb explained unnecessarily. "And that's Pa." The wagon rolled to a stop, and Samuel reached them first, his face alight with excitement. "Is this her? Is this the lady who's going to live with us?" "Samuel Rawlins, mind your manners," his father called, approaching with long strides. Grace took the moment to study Isaac Rawlins. He was taller than she'd expected, broad-shouldered from years of ranch work, with dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were startlingly blue beneath straight brows. She guessed him to be in his late 30s. "Miss Foster," he said, reaching up to help her down from the wagon. His hands were strong and calloused but gentle as they spanned her waist. "Welcome to Raven Creek Ranch. I hope your journey wasn't too difficult." "Thank you, Mr. Rawlins," she replied, feeling suddenly self-conscious about her travel-worn appearance. The journey was educational, to say the least. Isaac smiled briefly, and she caught a glimpse of what must have been a handsome face in younger, less careworn days. "Caleb, take Miss Foster's things to the house. Samuel, stop circling the lady like a coyote." Samuel reluctantly stepped back, though his eyes never left Grace. "Are you really going to cook and clean for us? Do you know how to make apple pie? Can you read stories? Our ma used to read stories." "Samuel," Isaac said sharply, and the boy fell silent. Grace knelt to the child's level, ignoring the dust that would further soil her dress. "I can indeed cook and clean, Samuel. I make a passable apple pie, and I was a schoolteacher in Boston, so I have many stories to share if you'd like." Samuel's eyes widened. "A real teacher? With books and everything?" "With books and everything," she confirmed, smiling. "She makes me laugh, Pa," Samuel announced, turning to his father. "Let's keep her." Isaac's face flushed with embarrassment. "Son, Miss Foster is not a stray pup. She's here to work, and we'll show her proper respect." He turned to Grace. "I apologize. It's been some time since we've had a woman's influence in the house." Grace stood, brushing off her skirts. "No apology needed, Mr. Rawlins. Your son's enthusiasm is refreshing after a long journey." The interior of the Rawlins home was unexpectedly spacious but showed clear evidence of bachelor living. The main room served as both parlor and dining area, with a large stone fireplace at one end. A kitchen opened off to the side, and Grace glimpsed piled dishes and disordered cupboards. A narrow staircase led to what she presumed were bedrooms above. "It's not much," Isaac said, watching her take in the space, "but it's solid. Built it myself 6 years ago." "It's lovely," Grace said sincerely. The large windows let in abundant light, and though cluttered, the home felt warm and lived in. "Though I can see why you advertised for help." Isaac's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Samuel, show Miss Foster to her room while I help Caleb with her trunk." The boy eagerly took Grace's hand, pulling her toward a door off the main room. "You get Ma's sewing room. Pa cleared it out special." Grace followed Samuel into a small but pleasant room with a window overlooking the creek. A narrow bed with a quilt stood against one wall, a washstand with a mirror in the corner, and a small chest of drawers completed the furnishings. "Pa put in the bed last week," Samuel informed her. "He said a lady needs privacy." "Your father is very considerate," Grace said, removing her bonnet and gloves. Samuel hopped onto the bed, bouncing slightly. "Ma died when I was 5. Pa says I look like her." Grace paused, unsure how to respond to this abrupt confidence. "I'm very sorry about your mother." Samuel shrugged with the resilience of childhood. "I don't remember her much." "Caleb does, though. He gets sad sometimes." He studied Grace with solemn eyes. "Are you going to stay forever?" "I've agreed to stay for a year," Grace answered carefully. "After that, we'll see." "A year is a long time," Samuel decided, apparently satisfied. "Long enough for Pa to get used to you." Grace was saved from responding by Isaac's arrival with her trunk. He set it down and gave his son a stern look. "Samuel, I believe you have chores waiting. Miss Foster needs time to settle in." Once the boy had reluctantly departed, Isaac turned to Grace. "I should outline your duties. The boys need regular meals. Samuel requires supervision with his lessons. We have some school books, but he's fallen behind without proper instruction. The house needs—" He gestured vaguely. "Everything," Grace supplied with a smile. "I understand, Mr. Rawlins. I'm quite capable of managing a household. Isaac nodded, seemingly relieved. I pay at the end of each month. Sundays are yours to do as you please. We can take you to town for church if you wish. If there's anything you need, just ask. Thank you. I'll start with the kitchen, I think, after I've changed. Isaac lingered a moment longer, an unreadable expression on his face. Miss Foster, I should mention Samuel gets attached quickly. He's been without a mother's care for 5 years now. I'd appreciate if you'd be kind in your dealings with him, but maintain appropriate distance. Grace understood the unspoken concern. Mr. Rawlins, I'm here to work, not to replace anyone. I'll be kind to your son, but I won't overstep. He studied her face, then nodded once. Supper's usually at sundown. I'll leave you to settle in. After he left, Grace sat on the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what she'd done. She'd traveled nearly 2,000 miles to live with strangers, all to escape the whispers and pointing fingers that had followed her after Edward Thornton's lies had ruined her teaching career. She'd never been a housekeeper before, had never lived outside a city, had never been so utterly alone. But she wasn't truly alone, she realized. There was a curious 10-year-old boy who wanted stories, a 15-year-old young man finding his way to adulthood, and a solemn father trying to raise them properly. And there was a house that needed a woman's touch. Grace opened her trunk and removed her work dresses. It was time to begin again. By the end of her first week at Raven Creek Ranch, Grace had established a routine. She rose before dawn to kindle the kitchen fire and prepare breakfast for Isaac and the boys before they headed out to work with the cattle. Mornings were spent cleaning and organizing the long-neglected house, afternoons dedicated to Samuel's lessons, and evenings to preparing dinner and mending the family's clothes. The work was harder than teaching had been, but there was satisfaction in seeing immediate results: a gleaming floor, a properly darned sock, a child mastering his letters. And there was peace in the solitude of the ranch, far from the hurtful gossip of Boston society. Isaac Rawlins remained something of a mystery. He was unfailingly polite but maintained a careful distance. He left the house at first light and often returned after dark, taking his meals quickly and speaking little. Grace sometimes felt his eyes on her when she was helping Samuel with his studies or serving dinner, but whenever she looked up, his gaze was elsewhere. It was Samuel who brought warmth and laughter to her days. The boy followed her like a shadow whenever he wasn't doing his chores, full of questions about Boston, about books, about everything. "Miss Grace," he asked one afternoon as she kneaded bread dough, "do you have a sweetheart back in Boston?" Grace's hands stilled momentarily. "No, Samuel, I don't." "Why not? You're pretty. Prettier than any lady in Laramie." She smiled at the innocent compliment. "Thank you, Samuel. Sometimes things don't work out the way we expect." "Is that why you came here? Because things didn't work out?" Grace resumed kneading with more vigor than necessary. "That's a complicated question. Pa says that when grown-ups say something's complicated, they just don't want to explain it to children." Grace laughed despite herself. "Your father is a wise man." "He thinks you're pretty too," Samuel announced. Grace nearly dropped the dough. "Samuel Rawlins, you shouldn't make up stories." "I'm not," the boy protested. "I heard him telling Mr. Harper that you were a fine-looking woman. That means pretty, doesn't it?" Grace felt heat rising in her cheeks. It's not polite to eavesdrop on adult conversations. "Now, would you like to help me shape these loaves?" That evening, Grace found it difficult to meet Isaac's eyes across the dinner table. She was acutely aware of his presence in a way she hadn't been before, noticing the strength in his forearms as he cut his meat, the deep timbre of his voice as he asked Caleb about the new foal. "Miss Grace was a teacher in Boston," Samuel announced during a lull in conversation. She knows all about history and geography and fractions. Isaac glanced at Grace. Is that so? Samuel seems quite taken with his lessons lately. He's a bright student, Grace replied. He's particularly good with numbers. She's teaching me about maps, Samuel continued eagerly. She says if I learn to read maps proper, I could be a surveyor or an explorer when I grow up. Or a rancher who knows his own land, Isaac added. Being a rancher is boring, Samuel declared. You just stay in one place all the time. Isaac's expression tightened. This land feeds you and clothes you, son. There's nothing boring about that. Sensing tension, Grace intervened. Samuel, why don't you show your father the map you drew today of the ranch? The boy brightened and ran to retrieve his work. While he was gone, Isaac spoke quietly to Grace. You don't need to shield him from correction, Miss Foster. I wasn't, Grace began, then reconsidered. I apologize if it seemed that way. I only thought he might better understand the value of the ranch if he saw it from a different perspective. Isaac studied her for a moment. You have a gentle way about you. It's not unwelcome, but I don't want my sons growing soft. There's a difference between softness and sensitivity, Mr. Rawlins, Grace replied evenly. One can be strong and still appreciate beauty and learning. Something flickered in Isaac's eyes, surprise, perhaps, that she would speak so directly. Before he could respond, Samuel returned with his map, proudly displaying the crude but recognizable outline of Raven Creek Ranch, with the house, barns, and creek all carefully labeled. Isaac examined it carefully. This is good work, son. You've got the distances about right. He pointed to an area on the drawing. But you've missed the north pasture here. That's because Miss Grace hasn't been there yet, so I couldn't ask her about it, Samuel explained. Isaac looked up at Grace. Would you like to see more of the ranch, Miss Foster? Sunday's your day off. I could show you around, if you'd care to ride out. The invitation surprised her. I would like that very much, Mr. Rawlins. Though I should warn you, I'm not an accomplished horsewoman. We have a gentle mare that would suit you, Isaac said. And Samuel can come along to ensure his map is complete. Samuel whooped with delight, and even Caleb looked interested. Can I come too, Pa? The older boy asked. Don't you have plans with the Harper boy to fish? Caleb shrugged. I could cancel. Isaac raised an eyebrow. Since when do you prefer riding with your old pa to fishing with Jim Harper? Since we got company worth showing off to, Caleb replied with a grin. Grace felt her cheeks warm again as Isaac gave his older son a warning look. Miss Foster isn't here for your entertainment, Caleb. No offense meant, Miss Grace, Caleb said quickly. It's just nice having you here. The house feels different. Better, Samuel added firmly. It feels better. Later, after the boys had gone to bed, Grace found Isaac sitting alone by the fire, a ledger open on his lap. She was about to withdraw when he looked up. You've made quite an impression on my sons, he said. Grace paused in the doorway. They're good boys, Mr. Rawlins. You've raised them well. Their mother raised them for the first half of their lives, Isaac said, closing the ledger. I've been doing my best to finish the job. May I ask what happened to Mrs. Rawlins? Grace ventured. Isaac was silent for so long that Grace thought he might not answer. Fever, he said finally. 5 years ago. Took her in 3 days. Nothing the doctor could do. I'm sorry, Grace said softly. It must have been very difficult for all of you. Isaac stared into the fire. We manage. The boys needed their mother, especially Samuel. He was just 5. He looked up at Grace suddenly. Why did you really come west, Miss Foster? An educated woman like yourself could have found better positions than housekeeper on a cattle ranch. Grace hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. I needed a fresh start, she said finally. Boston held. Painful memories. A man, Isaac guessed. In a manner of speaking, Grace moved into the room, taking the chair opposite him. I was engaged to be married to another teacher. I discovered he had been inappropriate with some of the female students. When I confronted him, he claimed I had been the one behaving improperly. The school board believed him. Isaac's expression darkened. So you were punished for his crimes. His family is prominent in Boston society. Mine is not. Grace smoothed her skirt. When I saw your advertisement, it seemed like providence. A chance to go where no one knew me or had preconceived notions about my character. And now you're stuck in the middle of nowhere with a widower and 2 wild boys, Isaac said, a hint of self-deprecation in his tone. I find I prefer it to Boston at the moment, Grace replied with a small smile. Though I will admit, the kitchen was a shock. Isaac actually laughed, a warm sound that transformed his face. I warned you in the advertisement that we were in desperate need. So you did. Though desperate was perhaps an understatement. They shared a moment of companionable silence before Isaac spoke again. About Sunday, if you'd rather have your day to yourself, I understand. Don't feel obligated to spend it riding around dusty pastures. I'd like to see more of the ranch, Grace assured him. Truly. Isaac nodded, rising from his chair. Then we'll plan on it. Good night, Miss Foster. Good night, Mr. Rawlins. Sunday dawned clear and warm, perfect for riding. Grace dressed in her most practical skirt and a shirtwaist she'd modified for greater freedom of movement. She braided her hair tightly and topped it with a wide-brimmed hat borrowed from Caleb to shield her fair skin from the sun. Isaac was waiting by the corral with 3 saddled horses when she emerged from the house. Samuel was already mounted on a small pony, practically bouncing with excitement. This is Daisy, Isaac said, indicating a dappled gray mare. She's steady and patient, good for beginners. He helped Grace mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Once she was settled in the saddle, he adjusted her stirrups and handed her the reins. Hold them loosely, like this, he demonstrated. Daisy knows what to do. You just need to give her direction. Grace nodded, trying to appear more confident than she felt. Isaac swung easily onto his own horse, a tall chestnut gelding with a white blaze. Ready? He asked. As I'll ever be, Grace replied. They set out at a walk, following the creek that gave the ranch its name. Isaac rode beside Grace, occasionally pointing out features of the land or offering gentle corrections to her riding posture. Samuel trotted ahead, then circled back, too excited to maintain a steady pace. How many acres do you have? Grace asked as they crested a small rise. About 12,000, Isaac replied. My father started with just 2,000 when he came out from Missouri after the war. I've added to it over the years. It's beautiful, Grace said sincerely, taking in the expanse of rolling grassland dotted with wildflowers. In the distance, snow-capped mountains rose against the blue sky. It can be harsh in winter, Isaac said, but spring makes up for it. They rode for nearly 2 hours, stopping occasionally to rest the horses and to allow Samuel to make additions to his map. Isaac showed Grace the north pasture where the pregnant cows were kept, the line cabin where he sometimes stayed during calving season, and the spring that never ran dry, even in the hottest summer. This is my favorite place on the whole ranch, Samuel announced as they dismounted by a bend in the creek where tall cottonwoods provided shade. Pa used to bring Ma here for picnics. Isaac shot his son a warning glance, but Grace pretended not to notice the awkwardness. Instead, she admired the way the sunlight dappled through the leaves onto the clear water. I can see why you'd love it here, she said to Samuel. It's like something from a storybook. They spread a blanket under the trees and shared the lunch Grace had packed: fried chicken, biscuits, and apple tarts. Samuel wolfed down his portion, then asked permission to wade in the creek. "Stay where we can see you," Isaac instructed, watching as the boy removed his boots and rolled up his pant legs. Alone with Isaac for the first time, Grace felt suddenly self-conscious. She busied herself repacking the remnants of their meal. "You've made a real difference in Samuel," Isaac said after a moment. "He's more focused, less wild, and he's reading better already." "He's eager to learn," Grace replied. "He just needed consistent guidance. Something I haven't been able to provide," Isaac said, a hint of bitterness in his tone. "You've been raising 2 boys and running a ranch single-handedly," Grace pointed out. "That would be a challenge for anyone." Isaac picked up a twig, breaking it methodically into small pieces. "After Mary died, I thought I could manage everything myself. Pride, I suppose, or stubbornness. Took me 5 years to admit I needed help. It's not a weakness to need help, Mr. Rawlins." "Isaac," he said suddenly, "out here, with no one else around, you might as well call me Isaac." Grace smiled. "Then you should call me Grace." He tested her name, saying it slowly as if tasting it. "Grace, it suits you." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Grace felt something shift between them, a recognition, perhaps, or a possibility. Then Samuel's shout broke the spell. "Pa! Miss Grace! Look what I found!" The boy came splashing toward them, hands cupped around something. He knelt on the blanket and carefully opened his palms to reveal a smooth, heart-shaped stone, polished by the creek water. "It's for you, Miss Grace," he said solemnly. "To thank you for teaching me and making good food and not yelling when I tracked mud on your clean floor yesterday." Grace accepted the stone, genuinely touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Samuel. I'll treasure it." Samuel beamed, then turned to his father. "She's keeping it, Pa. That means she's keeping us too, right?" Isaac's face flushed. "Samuel, that's not—" "It's all right," Grace interrupted gently. "Samuel, I promised to stay for a year, remember? I won't be leaving anytime soon." The boy nodded, satisfied, and ran back to the creek. Isaac avoided Grace's eyes, focusing instead on saddling the horses for their return journey. The ride back to the ranch was quieter, all 3 tired from the day's activities. As they approached the house, Grace noticed a wagon in the yard and a woman standing on the porch. "We have company," she said to Isaac, who frowned. "That's Widow Clayton's wagon," he said, spurring his horse ahead. By the time Grace and Samuel reached the house, Isaac was already in conversation with the visitor, an attractive woman in her 30s, dressed in a stylish traveling outfit. "Miss Foster," Isaac said as Grace dismounted. "This is Mrs. Vivian Clayton. Her late husband owned the mercantile in town." "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Clayton," Grace said, extending her hand. "Likewise," the widow replied, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I was just telling Isaac that I've brought some fabric samples. The ladies' auxiliary is making new curtains for the church, and we need every household to contribute." "How thoughtful," Grace murmured. "I also brought a pie," Mrs. Clayton added, gesturing to a covered dish on the porch rail. "I know how busy you must be, settling in as housekeeper, and thought the family might appreciate a home-cooked dessert." The emphasis on housekeeper was subtle but unmistakable. Grace maintained her polite smile. "How kind of you to think of the Rawlins family." "I've always had a special concern for Isaac and the boys," Mrs. Clayton said, turning her attention back to Isaac. "Ever since dear Mary passed." Samuel, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Miss Grace makes better pies than anyone, and she teaches me reading and geography and how to fold my clothes proper." Mrs. Clayton's smile tightened. "How nice. Isaac, perhaps we could discuss the fabric selection inside." Actually, Vivian, we've just returned from a long ride, Isaac said. Another time might be better. The widow's disappointment was evident, but she recovered quickly. Of course, I'll leave the samples and the pie. Perhaps you could send word when would be convenient for me to call again. After Mrs. Clayton departed, Samuel turned to his father. I don't like her pies. They're always too sweet. Samuel, Isaac admonished, though without much conviction. Mrs. Clayton is being neighborly. She wants to marry you, Samuel stated matter-of-factly. That's what Caleb says. Isaac closed his eyes briefly, as if praying for patience. Go find your brother and tell him supper will be late tonight. When Samuel had gone, Isaac turned to Grace with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry about that. Vivian can be persistent. You have nothing to apologize for, Grace said, though she felt a strange discomfort at the widow's obvious interest in Isaac. She's been bringing pies and offering help since about 6 months after Mary died, Isaac explained as they walked toward the house. She's not a bad person, just determined, Grace suggested. Isaac's mouth quirked. That's a kind way to put it. He paused at the porch steps. Thank you for today. It's been a long time since I've enjoyed an afternoon like that. I enjoyed it too, Grace said softly. Very much. Their eyes met again, and this time the moment stretched longer. Grace found herself noticing the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his dark hair curled slightly where it met his collar, the strength in his jawline. The sound of the door opening broke the spell. Caleb emerged, eyebrows raised at finding them standing so close together. Samuel says you went all the way to the North Spring today, he said. And that Miss Grace rides better than Mrs. Clayton. Isaac shook his head. That boy needs to learn discretion. Caleb grinned. He's just telling the truth. Pa, Mrs. Clayton looks like a sack of potatoes on a horse. Caleb Rawlins, Grace said, fighting a smile. That's unkind, even if it might be accurate. The boy's grin widened. See, Pa? Miss Grace understands. As May turned to June, life at Raven Creek Ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Grace found herself looking forward to each day, to Samuel's enthusiasm for learning, to Caleb's increasing willingness to share his thoughts with her, and especially to the quiet evenings when Isaac would sometimes join her by the fire after the boys were in bed. These conversations became the highlight of Grace's days. They talked about books Isaac was surprisingly well read for a rancher, about the boys' education, about life in Boston versus Wyoming Territory. Sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence, Grace with her mending, Isaac with his ledgers or whittling. Gradually, the formal Mr. Rawlins and Miss Foster gave way to Isaac and Grace, even when others were present. Grace told herself it was merely the natural progression of people living under the same roof, but she couldn't deny the quickening of her pulse when Isaac said her name, or the warmth that spread through her when their hands accidentally touched passing the coffee pot at breakfast. She was falling in love with him, she realized one evening as she watched him patiently explaining cattle breeding to Samuel. It was foolish and probably hopeless. She was his housekeeper. Nothing more, but her heart paid no attention to such practical considerations. Isaac, for his part, found reasons to be around the house more often. Tasks that had previously been delegated to ranch hands suddenly required his personal supervision. He took his midday meal at the house when he'd previously eaten with the men, and he started ending his workday earlier, just in time to hear Samuel's reading lesson before supper. Grace noticed the change but didn't remark on it. She told herself not to read too much into his actions. He was simply a father taking an interest in his son's education. The fact that his gaze often lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking meant nothing. The truth emerged on a stormy afternoon in late June. A summer thunderstorm had kept everyone indoors, and Grace was teaching Samuel to make biscuits while Caleb cleaned his saddle at the kitchen table. Isaac had ridden out early to check on some strays and hadn't yet returned. Pa likes biscuits with honey, Samuel informed Grace as he clumsily shaped the dough. Ma used to make them special for him on Sundays. Your mother must have been a wonderful cook, Grace said, a statement she'd made many times when the boys mentioned Mary Rawlins. She was all right, Caleb said unexpectedly. But you're better. Grace looked up, surprised. Caleb rarely compared her to his mother. Your stew doesn't have lumpy gravy, the boy continued, focused on his saddle. And you don't burn the edges of cornbread. Caleb Rawlins, Grace scolded gently. It's not right to speak ill of your mother. I'm not, he protested. I'm just saying you cook better. And you don't get headaches all the time or cry when Pa's late coming home. Grace stilled. Your mother was unwell? Caleb shrugged. She got sad a lot. Pa said it was because she missed St. Louis and her family. She didn't like it here much. She hated the wind, Samuel chimed in. She said it drove her crazy. Grace absorbed this new information. She'd formed an image of Mary Rawlins as a kind of sainted figure, perfect in every way. The reality seemed more complicated. Your mother had a difficult adjustment to ranch life, she said carefully. That doesn't mean she didn't love you both very much. I know, Caleb said. But she wasn't happy here. Not like you are. Before Grace could respond, the front door burst open, and Isaac strode in, dripping wet from the rain. Storm's getting worse, he announced, removing his slicker. Creek's rising fast. We may need to move the horses to higher ground if it keeps up. He noticed the domestic scene before him and paused. What's all this? We're making biscuits for you, Pa, Samuel said proudly. Miss Grace is teaching me how. Isaac's expression softened as he looked at his youngest son's flour-covered hands and earnest face. Is that so? Well, they look mighty fine. His eyes met Grace's over Samuel's head, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. There was warmth there, and something deeper that she dared not name. You're soaked through, she said, finding her voice. You should change before you catch cold. Yes, madam, he said with the hint of a smile. As he passed her on his way to the stairs, he murmured, You're good with them, Grace. Better than I could have hoped. The storm worsened through the evening. Wind howled around the eaves, and rain lashed against the windows. After dinner, Isaac went to check on the horses one last time while Grace put Samuel to bed. Will the creek flood our house? The boy asked as she tucked the blankets around him. No, sweetheart. Your father built this house well above the flood line, Grace assured him. The rain sounds scary, but we're safe here. I'm not scared, Samuel insisted, though his eyes widened at a particularly loud crack of thunder. Not with you and Pa here. Grace smoothed his hair back from his forehead. That's right. Your father would never let anything happen to you. Or to you, Samuel said confidently. Pa wouldn't let anything bad happen to you either. He told me so. Grace's hand stilled. Did he? Samuel nodded, already growing drowsy. When I asked if you might get sick like Ma did, he said he'd protect you better this time. Grace sat with the sleeping child longer than necessary, her mind racing. What had Isaac meant by protecting her better this time? Did he feel he had failed to protect Mary? And more importantly, did his concern for Grace stem from mere duty to an employee or something more? She was still pondering these questions when she descended the stairs to find Isaac standing by the fire, staring into the flames. He had changed into dry clothes, but his hair was still damp, curling more than usual. Samuel's asleep, she said softly. The storm doesn't seem to bother him much. Isaac turned, and the expression on his face made Grace's heart skip. Grace, he said, his voice low and urgent. There's something I need to say to you. She moved closer, drawn by the intensity in his eyes. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about your position here," he began, and Grace's heart sank. Was he going to dismiss her? Had she been too familiar, too attached to the boys? "My position?" she repeated carefully. "Yes, as our housekeeper." Isaac took a step toward her. "It's not right anymore." Grace felt as if the floor were tilting beneath her feet. "I see. If I've been unsatisfactory in my duties—" "No," Isaac interrupted, reaching for her hands. "That's not what I mean at all. You've been perfect. Too perfect." Confused, Grace looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. "I don't understand." "I hired a housekeeper," Isaac said, his thumbs brushing over her knuckles. "But I find myself wanting a wife." Grace's breath caught. "Isaac, let me finish, please," he said gently. "I know it's too soon. You've only been here 2 months. But I've seen how you are with the boys, how you've brought life back into this house. I've watched you face every challenge with grace and strength. I've come to care for you in a way I didn't think possible after Mary died." "The boys need stability," Grace said, trying to think clearly despite the hammering of her heart. "They've lost so much already." "The boys need you," Isaac corrected. "They love you already. Samuel asks me daily if you're going to stay forever. Even Caleb, who barely spoke to me for a year after his mother died, smiles again when you're around." "And what do you need, Isaac?" Grace asked softly. His eyes darkened. "I need the woman who makes me want to come home at the end of the day. The woman who challenges me and supports me and makes me laugh for the first time in years." He released one of her hands to gently touch her cheek. "I need you, Grace. If you'll have me." Grace leaned into his touch, overwhelmed by the emotions coursing through her. "I care for you too," she whispered. "More than I should, given my position." "Forget your position," Isaac said, his voice rough with feeling. "Tell me what your heart wants." "You," Grace admitted. "You and the boys and this life we could build together." Isaac's face transformed with joy. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When Grace responded, sliding her arms around his neck, it deepened into something more urgent, more passionate. When they finally parted, both breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I should do this properly," he murmured. "Ask your father for permission. Give you a proper courtship." Grace laughed softly. "My father is 3,000 miles away, and I'm a grown woman who's made her own decisions for years now." "Still," Isaac insisted, "I want to do right by you. Would you allow me to court you, Grace Foster? With the intention of making you my wife if you'll have me?" "Yes," Grace said simply. "I would like that very much." The storm outside seemed to fade into insignificance as they sealed their agreement with another kiss. The following morning dawned clear and bright, as if the storm had washed the world clean. Grace woke early, her heart light with happiness. The events of the previous night seemed almost dreamlike, but the memory of Isaac's kisses and his declaration were very real. She dressed with extra care, pinning her hair in a softer style than usual and choosing a blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. When she entered the kitchen, she found Isaac already there, building up the fire. He straightened when he saw her, his eyes warming as they took in her appearance. "Good morning," he said softly. "Good morning," she replied, suddenly shy despite their intimacy the night before. Isaac crossed to her and took her hands in his. "I meant everything I said last night," he assured her. "In case you were wondering in the light of day." Grace smiled. "I meant everything too." He pressed a quick, tender kiss to her lips. "The boys will be up soon. I thought we might tell them at breakfast about our Changed circumstances. Are you sure it's not too soon? Grace asked. We've only just decided ourselves. Samuel has been asking when you're going to become his new mother since your second week here, Isaac said with a chuckle. And Caleb already suspects, I think. He's too observant for his own good. As predicted, the boys took the news with enthusiasm. Samuel launched himself at Grace, wrapping his arms around her waist. I knew it, he crowed. I told Caleb you'd be our new ma. I knew Pa would ask you. Caleb's reaction was more reserved but no less pleased. Does this mean you'll be staying even after your year is up? He asked Grace. I'll be staying as long as you all want me, she promised. Forever, then, Samuel decided firmly. Isaac and Grace agreed to a proper courtship period of 3 months before announcing their engagement publicly. This was partly for propriety's sake. The community would be scandalized if the wealthy rancher married his housekeeper too hastily, and partly to give themselves time to be certain of their feelings. In practice, however, their relationship deepened rapidly. Isaac took Grace on proper outings, rides across the ranch, dinners in Laramie, picnics by the creek. In the evenings, after the boys were asleep, they would talk for hours, sharing their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Grace learned about Isaac's childhood in Missouri, his decision to follow his father west after the war, his grief over Mary's death, and his struggle to raise 2 boys alone. In turn, she told him more about her life in Boston, her teaching career, her broken engagement, the scandal that had driven her west. I should find this Thornton fellow and teach him some manners, Isaac growled when she explained fully what had happened. He's not worth the effort, Grace assured him. Besides, if not for him, I might never have come to Wyoming. I might never have found you and the boys. Then I suppose I owe the scoundrel my thanks, Isaac conceded, pulling her close. Though I still wouldn't mind giving him a thrashing. July brought scorching heat and the annual Independence Day celebration in Laramie. The entire Rawlins family attended, marking Grace's first public appearance as Isaac's intended bride. Though they hadn't formally announced their engagement, their changed relationship was obvious to anyone who observed them together. Most of the community received the news warmly. The Harpers, whose son was Caleb's friend, were particularly supportive. Mrs. Harper embraced Grace and whispered, "Those boys needed a mother, and Isaac needed a wife with sense. I'm glad he found you." Not everyone was pleased, however. Vivian Clayton made her disapproval evident, greeting Grace coolly and finding excuses to monopolize Isaac's attention throughout the day. When the dancing began in the evening, she managed to secure the first dance with him, leaving Grace standing awkwardly alone. "Don't mind Vivian," a voice said beside her. Grace turned to find an elderly woman watching the dancers with a knowing expression. "She's had her cap set for Isaac Rawlins since before his wife's body was cold." "I'm sorry, I don't believe we've met," Grace said, extending her hand. "I'm Grace Foster." "Eliza Morgan," the woman replied, shaking Grace's hand firmly. "I delivered both those Rawlins boys and half the children in the county. I knew Mary Rawlins well." Grace tensed slightly, unsure what would follow. Many of the older women in the community seemed to view her as an interloper, someone trying to replace their beloved friend. "Mary was a lovely girl," Eliza continued, surprising Grace with her candor. "But she was never suited to ranch life, too delicate, too attached to city comforts. Isaac tried to make her happy, but the isolation wore on her. The winters were especially hard." "The boys mentioned she was unhappy," Grace said carefully. Eliza nodded. "Melancholy, the doctor called it. Common enough among women out here, especially those not raised to it. She loved those boys fiercely, but the life here was too much for her." The old woman studied Grace appraisingly. "You're made of sterner stuff, I think." "I hope so," Grace said honestly. I've grown to love the ranch and the life there. And Isaac? Eliza asked bluntly. Grace met her gaze steadily. Yes, very much. Good. He deserves happiness after what he went through with Mary. Just be sure you know what you're committing to. Ranch life isn't easy, even for the strongest woman. I understand that, Grace assured her. I'm not entering into this blindly. Eliza seemed satisfied. Then you have my blessing, for whatever that's worth. And don't worry about Vivian Clayton. Isaac never showed the slightest interest in her, even when half the county was trying to push them together. As if to prove her point, Isaac appeared at that moment, having extricated himself from Vivian's company. He greeted Eliza warmly, then turned to Grace with an apologetic smile. I believe I promised you the next dance, he said, offering his arm. As he led her onto the dance floor, Grace felt the eyes of the community upon them. Everyone is watching, she murmured. Let them watch, Isaac replied, drawing her closer than was strictly proper. I want everyone to know that you're the woman I've chosen. The music began, and as they moved together in perfect harmony, Grace knew she had found her place at last. August brought the wheat harvest and preparations for the coming winter. Grace found herself busy from dawn until dusk, canning vegetables from the kitchen garden, drying herbs, and helping the boys preserve wild berries they gathered from the hills behind the ranch. Despite the work, these were the happiest days of her life. She and Isaac stole moments together whenever possible, a quick embrace in the pantry, a lingering kiss when the boys were occupied elsewhere, quiet conversations under the stars after the household was asleep. Their wedding was planned for September, after the most intensive harvest work was complete, but before the first snowfall made travel difficult for those coming from a distance. Grace wrote to her parents in Boston, inviting them to attend but not expecting them to make the journey. To her surprise and delight, they replied that they would come, eager to meet the man who had won their daughter's heart. They'll stay with us, of course, Isaac said when she shared the news. Samuel can move in with Caleb temporarily to give them his room. Are you sure? Grace asked. They could stay in town. They're going to be family, Isaac said firmly. They belong here. As the wedding approached, Grace found herself reflecting on the remarkable turn her life had taken. Less than 6 months earlier, she had arrived at Raven Creek Ranch as a desperate woman seeking refuge. Now she was preparing to become mistress of the ranch and mother to 2 boys she had come to love as her own. One evening, she found Samuel sitting on the porch, unusually subdued. Grace sat beside him, gently bumping his shoulder with hers. What's troubling you, Samuel? The boy fidgeted with a stick he'd been whittling. When you marry Pa, will you still have time to teach me things? Grace's heart melted at the uncertainty in his voice. Of course I will. Being your stepmother doesn't mean I'll stop being your teacher. But you'll have more chores and stuff. And maybe babies someday. Grace put her arm around his shoulders. Samuel Rawlins, you listen to me. No matter what happens, you will always be important to me. Yes, things will change, and someday you might have brothers or sisters. But my heart is big enough for all of you. Samuel leaned against her. Promise. I promise, she said, kissing the top of his head. Besides, who else would teach me how to fish or show me where the best wild strawberries grow? This seemed to reassure him. Nobody, he decided. I'm the best at finding strawberries. You certainly are, Grace agreed. And don't forget, after we're married, you won't have to call me Miss Grace anymore. You can call me whatever feels right to you. Samuel considered this seriously. Could I call you Ma? Not right away, maybe, but someday. Grace swallowed the lump in her throat. I would be honored if you called me Ma, whenever you're ready. Caleb says he's going to keep calling you Grace because he's practically grown, Samuel confided. But I think he might change his mind. That's fine too, Grace assured him. Everyone can decide what feels right for them. 2 weeks before the wedding, Grace's parents arrived from Boston. Jonathan and Margaret Foster were initially overwhelmed by the vastness of Wyoming and the remoteness of the ranch, but they quickly warmed to Isaac and the boys. "I've never seen you so happy, Grace," her mother said as they prepared dinner together on their second evening. "This life suits you in a way Boston never did." "I was afraid you'd think I was making a mistake," Grace admitted. "Marrying a rancher and moving so far from home." Margaret smiled. "Your father and I only ever wanted your happiness. And anyone can see that Isaac Rawlins adores you. The way he looks at you," she broke off, her eyes misting. "It reminds me of how your father looked at me when we were young." "He still looks at you that way," Grace pointed out. "Yes, he does," Margaret agreed. "That's how I know you've chosen well. True love doesn't fade with time or hardship." The wedding day dawned clear and cool, a perfect September morning. The ceremony was held at the small church in Laramie, with nearly the entire community in attendance. Grace wore a gown of ivory silk that her mother had helped sew, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a formal veil. Isaac waited for her at the altar, Caleb standing proudly beside him as best man. When Grace appeared on her father's arm, the expression on Isaac's face was one she would treasure forever: wonder, joy, and love all mingled together. The service was simple but deeply moving. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac's kiss was tender yet possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up under the cottonwoods and lanterns strung from the branches. There was music and dancing, abundant food, and flowing champagne that Isaac had specially ordered from Denver for the occasion. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the valley, Isaac drew Grace away from the festivities to a quiet spot by the creek, where Samuel had found the heart-shaped stone months earlier. "Mrs. Rawlins," Isaac said, his voice husky with emotion, "I have something for you." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. Inside was a delicate gold locket. When Grace opened it, she found a tiny portrait of Samuel and Caleb on one side. The other side was empty. "For our future children," Isaac explained, seeing her questioning look. "If you want them." "I do," Grace said softly. "Very much." Isaac fastened the locket around her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin. "I never thought I'd find love again," he admitted. "After Mary died, I focused solely on the boys and the ranch. I thought that would be enough. And now," Grace asked, looking up at him, "now I know that love makes everything better, the good times sweeter, the hard times bearable." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You came to care for my home and my boys, but you've done so much more. You've brought me back to life, Grace." Deeply moved, Grace reached up to touch his face. "And you've given me a home and a family when I thought I'd lost everything. We've saved each other, I think." As the celebration continued into the evening, Samuel found them by the creek. "Pa," he said excitedly, "Mr. Harper says it's time for the special dance, the one just for you and Ma." Grace's heart filled with joy at hearing Samuel call her Ma for the first time. Isaac's eyes met hers, sharing in the moment's significance. "Well then," Isaac said, taking Grace's hand, "we shouldn't keep everyone waiting. Shall we, Mrs. Rawlins?" Hand in hand, they returned to their wedding celebration, surrounded by friends, family, and the promise of their future together. 1 year later, Grace stood on the porch of Raven Creek Ranch, watching as Isaac taught Samuel to rope a post. Caleb, now 16 and nearly as tall as his father, offered occasional advice from his perch on the corral fence. In Grace's arms, 2-month-old Mary Elizabeth Rawlins slept peacefully, bundled against the October chill. The past year had brought changes to the ranch. With Grace's encouragement, Isaac had expanded their garden and added fruit trees. A new room had been added to the house for the baby, and plans were underway for a proper schoolroom where Grace could teach not only Samuel but eventually little Mary and any other children who might come along. Life wasn't always easy. The previous winter had been harsh, with blizzards that kept them housebound for days. Spring had brought flooding that damaged some of the pastureland. Summer had seen a brief drought that worried everyone until late July rains saved the hay crop. Through it all, Grace and Isaac had faced each challenge together, their love deepening with each passing day. The boys continued to thrive, Caleb showing a genuine talent for breeding horses, Samuel developing into an avid reader with a gift for storytelling. As if sensing her thoughts, Isaac looked up from Samuel's lesson and caught Grace's eye. He said something to the boys, then walked toward the house, his face lighting with the smile he reserved just for her. "How are my girls?" he asked, climbing the porch steps. "We're perfect," Grace replied as he kissed her softly. "Mary's been sleeping for an hour." Isaac gently pulled back the blanket to see his daughter's face. "She looks more like you every day," he said with satisfaction. "But she has your eyes," Grace reminded him. "And your stubborn chin." Isaac laughed. "Poor child." He put his arm around Grace, and together they watched their sons, for Caleb had finally started calling Grace Ma on his 16th birthday, a gift that had moved her to tears. "Did you ever imagine this?" Isaac asked quietly. "When you stepped off that stage in Laramie last year, did you ever think your life would turn out this way?" Grace leaned against his solid strength, feeling the rhythmic breathing of their daughter against her chest. "Never. I came west seeking safety and solitude. I found love and family instead." "Samuel was right all along," Isaac mused. "About what?" "Remember what he said that first day? 'She makes me laugh, Pa. Let's keep her.'" Grace smiled at the memory. "Your son is very wise." "Our son," Isaac corrected gently. "They're all ours now." As the sun began to set over the Wyoming plains, casting long shadows across the land they both loved, Grace knew she had found her true home at last, not in a place, but in the hearts of the people she loved. "I think it's time to call everyone in for supper," she said after a moment. "In a minute," Isaac replied, tightening his arm around her waist. "I just want to hold on to this moment a little longer." Together they stood on the porch of the home they had built, watching their sons, holding their daughter, their love a shelter stronger than any walls could provide, a love that had begun when a young woman came west to care for a cowboy's home and found her heart's true destination.